hobby, for the 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 hobby.
Welcome to the For the Hobby podcast. My name is Jordan Hagedorn, and this is episode 4, the Brett Favre episode. On this episode, I'll talk about my favorite athlete of all time, former Green Bay Packer quarterback, and the gunslinger, Brett Favre. Since Brett was number 4, and this is purposely episode 4, I talked to 4 different people about Brett, his career, and his cards. I spoke with my dad, a great Favre collector from Mississippi named Sean McCarthy, a Wisconsin native and fellow Packer fan who grew up watching Brett play, Grant Slayton, and we'll end with my conversation with hobby legend Dr. James Beckett of Beckett Magazine fame. I'm super excited for this episode, and I want to start by sharing my backstory around my connection with Brett Favre himself. It all started when I became a Packer fan in 1994 at the age of 9, and Brett had just taken over the Pack and was starting to establish himself as one of the better young quarterbacks in the league. Then, a year later in 1995, I met Favre at a local signing at a sporting goods shop in my hometown of Eau Claire, Wisconsin, which is about 3 hours from Green Bay. When I met him, it was a huge catalyst for me. Brett would go on to win the NFL MVP that season and subsequently win 2 more in a row, making him then and still the only back-to-back-to-back NFL MVP. Then, of course, the Packers won the Super Bowl in 1997, and I, for lack of a better term, became obsessed. As a kid, you're super impressionable and looking for inspiration wherever you can find it, and Brett and the Packers were just that for me. They're the reason I fell in love with the game of football, and specifically football cards. I remember getting my first pack of cards. It was 1994 Score, and when I got my hands on it, I knew I was chasing the Brett Favre in that set. As a kid, I had a lot of base cards, but never had any good inserts, parallels, or any high-end cards by any means. And although I continued to be a fan of Brett and the Packers, I got out of collecting cards in the year 2000 as I entered high school. I didn't really collect cards again until 2014 when I moved to New York, and I attended a show in White Plains where I started digging in the dollar box for Favre cards and other Hall of Famers. You could say once again I became obsessed. Along with Favre, I started collecting my favorite players again from childhood like Michael Jordan, Ken Griffey Jr., Kobe Bryant, Frank Thomas, Barry Sanders, and a lot of other 90s guys. Long story short, I started down a path of picking up some of the most elite Favre cards ranging from 1991 to 2000 when I had originally left the hobby. Since then, I've probably picked up a lot of the most rare, sought-after Favre cards ever created. Anyone who knows me well knows that my quest to become one of the greatest 90s Favre collectors on the planet is real. And maybe, as my dad would say, kind of pathetic. With all that said, it's been an absolute pleasure to collect Brett Favre and connect with other collectors and reconnect with a hobby that I loved so much as a kid and very much love to this day. So I want to thank you all for the support, and I hope you enjoy these conversations around the legend, Brett Favre. I'll start with a chat I had with my dad recently. We touched on a bunch of fun topics, and he's very thoughtful and charming as always. So here's that conversation. Dad, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's nice to be here.
Today, we are going to talk about everything Brett Favre, going to talk about what we loved about him, growing up collecting Brett, and now my collection has evolved to be pretty massive. And so, first of all, Dad, growing up in Wisconsin, being a Packer fan, you struggled through a lot of really bad Packer teams, and then Brett came on the scene. Can you talk about your fandom as a Packer fan growing up?
Well, yeah, we watched the first and second Super Bowl, when the Packers were pretty much a dynasty. And then after that, things went downhill fast. I mean, it was like a lot of years until, the Pack, they had the Magic Man. He was kind of getting the team going again. And then, of course, injury he had. And then this Favre guy kind of stepped in and took over.
So Brett comes in 1992 and started what would be an amazing 15-year run with the Packers, essentially up to 2007. So what did you know about Brett and what was exciting about his game?
Didn't know anything about the guy, just I vaguely can remember that game that he came in actually when they were playing the Bengals and, pulled them through to get the W. But yeah, the thing about the guy was he's just durable. He could, he was there every game and it was fun to watch.
Yeah, those teams were really fun to watch, especially with Brett as their leader. One of my favorite memories is 1997 when the Packers won the Super Bowl. What do you remember about that game?
Just Reggie White sacking Bledsoe a couple times right at the end of the game. It was a tight game, and Big Reggie stepped up at the end. So that was one of the, not the highlight, but I just, when you just asked me that question, it was like that was what first came to my mind. So it must have been a big deal.
Yeah, Reggie White was dominant too. He was fun to watch. So what was it specifically about Brett that you think Packer fans love? And I know he was the gunslinger. He had a lot of fun playing, and he was durable. But what are some of the traits that you loved about Brett Favre?
Well, I don't know. A lot of people always call him a gunslinger, but he was just like a street player. It was like when you were a kid and you were out in your yard or out in the street playing football. And, yeah, you'd throw the ball and just hope your guy would get it. And he did that in the pros and got away with it. So there's like not many guys, if you look back in the league, of players that were like him, because he was carefree, but he made a lot of mistakes, but he's a Hall of Famer.
Yep, he is a Hall of Famer. And that is part of why I collect him, is just his strong legacy as a Packer. Going back to when I first started collecting cards in 1994, you guys would drop me off at the card shop. What do you remember about that?
Well, we'd give you some money to go buy some cards so that you'd be out of our hair. It'd give you something to do. You could tell you were really enjoying it, and so yeah, it was fun to watch to see get started in this the collection. I mean, taking you to these. Well, there was one in Eau Claire and there was one in Chippewa Falls, and we didn't have cell phones then, so we just dropped you off, and I don't even know if we picked a time when we were going to come and pick you up. It didn't. Whenever we showed up, there you were. I don't think a lot of parents probably would have done that, but it was like something you like to do, and it was like, well, not a big deal, whatever. You just drive across town, drop you off, and hung out with your buddy Richard or at the shop. And of course, you talked about these guys like they were your best buddies, and they were quite a bit older, but they must have enjoyed having you there, because otherwise they would have shooed you away, so that's how much you knew about different cards and the values of them and collections. And so I was pretty impressed with it. And, we probably gave you $4 or $5 here, buy something, buy some cards, and we pick you up, and it was like, that's a lot of cards for $5, I think you were holding out on us.
No doubt I was holding out.
What drew you to start collecting cards? I mean, I know you like sports. What drove you to like the Favre cards and Griffey's, and what was your deal? Why'd you like it so much?
I think it was just that generation of athletes was just transcendent. You had these amazing players like Favre, Jerry Rice, Barry Sanders. I was a big fan of Marshall Faulk as well. Then on the baseball side, you had Griffey, Frank Thomas, Derek Jeter, Alex Rodriguez, Cal Ripken Jr., and basketball, I loved Michael Jordan, Shaq, Penny. But there was just something about those players, and then the way the card companies captured those players on the cards. And that, coupled with the connection of people at the card shops and the card shows and my friends and trading, and just sports culture was just on fire at that point. So it was really a big deal, and just loved the Packers in those years too. So that was a big part of it.
What was a big deal with Favre? I mean, why is he the guy? I mean, I know he's a good player and everything, but his value, I suppose, is pretty good in the card collecting business. So why Favre?
When it came to Favre, I think it was just really about his love of the game. He played it with a passion that I've never really seen before, and really brought camaraderie to it, and had fun with his teammates, and really built the culture of the Green Bay Packers. And that's something that I look back at and very fond memories of it. And also I kind of carried over his really fun energy to a lot of projects I've done in my career. So he was just inspiring to me, and somebody that I looked up to when I was a kid, and I followed his career throughout, and he created so many fond memories for us.
So in your collection, Jordan, what approximately how many Favre cards do you have, and why?
I have about 15,000 Brett Favre cards altogether. And my main collection is 1991 to 2000. And you won't necessarily understand these, but I figured I'd tell the listeners about some of the stuff I have. So I really like the shiny inserts from the 90s. And so Favre's MVP seasons, 95, 96, 97, are the ones I really enjoy the most. And then I've been very fortunate to collect some of the grails, so to speak, where I have PMGs and rubies and platinum medallions and a lot of the really fun cards from the mid-90s that my friends from Arena Design created back in that era. So an amazing collection. I've been very fortunate to meet a lot of different Favre collectors and to be able to get my hands on a lot of cards I really never would have dreamed of as a kid. So I still have some of the modern Favres. Whenever I see Favres in a dollar box or random lots online, I do go ahead and pull the trigger. So if anybody has Favre, feel free to shoot me a message. I always enjoy that. And Favre is my favorite athlete of all time and somebody who I enjoyed watching, and it really has been a lot of fun to put together a really nice personal collection of his through the years.
One thing I've noticed is you really take good care of your collection. It's not like it's just in the shoebox like it was when I was a kid. You get your cards, you put the rubber bands around them, you throw them in the box, and you'd up in your room, you'd look at them once in a while, but not like the showcase things that you have. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, I've always taken care of my cards. You actually taught me that. You've always taught me to take care of anything we have and not take it for granted. I remember in Little League Baseball, I would clean my cleats before every single game. And my teammates would come up and say, "You got new cleats again?" And I'd say, "No, I clean them before every single game," and you taught me that. So I appreciate that. You taught me to take care of my things, but where did that come from in your life?
Well, when it came to like baseball cleats and that, you weren't going to get 3 pair for a season. You had a pair and then you wore them for 3 or 4 seasons till they wore out. So the best way to take care of them was to clean them up after a muddy game and, let them dry out good, polish them up, and ready for the next game. It was like it's like sneakers, you got a decent pair, you're going to take care of them, and the stuff that the goods that you have that you really like, or you take care of it.
Yeah, one question I had for you was, what do you think of Brett Favre's legacy as a Green Bay Packer?
I think just his passion for the game. He got along good with his teammates. Just watching different segments on him or whatever when he was talking about Mr. Miyagi. It's like a football game. It's big time stuff. It's money's involved and the win or the lose, and he just would be roaming the sidelines just loose and carefree, but I guess that's the way he was, even off the field, But yeah, he was tough. That's a big thing. The guy was tough.
Man, he was tough. He never missed a game. So my last question for you is, what do you think of my fandom of Brett Favre?
Well, that's your deal. You like these athletes. And you've met a lot of them too. I'm just a guy that watches ESPN, sports. I see these players and but you've actually met them. And so the Favre mania that you have is, when you were a kid, everything had a big G on it, or Brett Favre up in the corner. It hasn't gone away. It's kind of pathetic at times.
There's no doubt it may be a little obsessive at times, but that's been my goal, is to bring the same passion to the hobby that somebody like Brett brought to the game of football and to his teammates and just Packer Nation. So maybe there's something to that.
Yeah, it's that's what athletes are, I guess, is you always remember them, like Hank Aaron and Willie Mays. All those guys their legacy is going to be carried on, and that's kind of what you're doing in a sense.
I think that's a great point and a great note to end on, that I'm carrying on Brett's legacy through my collection. It's a great point. So, Dad, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
All right. Thanks for having me, Jordan.
Big thanks to my dad for being a part of the Favre episode. My next conversation is with an awesome Favre collector from Mississippi named Sean McCarthy. I met Sean through eBay, and we connected through our love of 90s Favre cards. He's a great guy who had a crazy Favre card hustle back in the day and has an incredible Favre collection. Hope you guys enjoy our chat. Sean, can you start out and tell the listeners a little bit about your background?
Okay, so I was born and raised in Mississippi, born in Hattiesburg. So I went to school at Southern Miss, so that's where Favre went, and that's where he lives. And he actually went to the same church that I did when I was a student there. We're both Catholics. So I've come across him sometimes. I don't know him personally other than like just saying hi, because, I'm not going to be the guy that goes to bother Brett Favre when he's at church, right? But he's the USM guy, so that's why I collected Favre, and he was so big in Mississippi, especially in Hattiesburg in the 90s. I mean, you go to a card shop and it would be unreal. So I grew up a couple hours north of Hattiesburg when I was a teenager, and I made a lot of money buying Brett Favre cards from the card shops in that area and then going to Hattiesburg because they would sell for so much more there, even though it's only 2 hours away. And this was all before the internet really, boomed. And I would just go there and I would trade for Griffies and sell cards and just go back and forth and do that because I had relatives that still lived in Hattiesburg. So I always, had this big Brett Favre collection that I was building, and it fed my other collection. And I've just been hustling like that since I was 13 years old. And the cards have always been a big hobby of mine. And my dad, he grew up in New York City. And my grandpa was police chief of New York City and actually knew Mickey Mantle and some of those guys. So I have a team ball signed by Mantle. And I recently, in the last 6-7 years, started building a Mickey Mantle collection. Even though I'm not a Yankees fan, I'm actually a Red Sox fan. But as far as baseball cards go, that is the premier guy from the 50s and 60s. So I dabble in a little bit of everything, but my love is truly in the 90s. So the Brett Favre stuff, I mean, I don't really go past the year 1999 with what I collect with him. And I have no interest in owning any of his Jets or Vikings stuff.
Yeah, I'm the same. So I grew up in Wisconsin, and I was 10 when I met him in 1995. And it was a pretty awesome thing. I started doing all my projects in school about the Packers and Favre. And my 6th grade teacher ended up bringing me to my first Packer game, her and her husband. So pretty amazing stuff. That was 1995, and then collected him 95, 96, 97, all the way up till 2000. So I don't go past 2000. I really collect 91 to 2000.
Yeah, same.
But what year was that when you were hustling those Favre cards? Was that right in those MVP seasons?
Yeah. So it was like 95, 96, and that was in 97. I mean, that was really when inserts and rare parallels started popping up. Anything prior to 1996, there wasn't a whole lot of rarity other than artist proofs and some rare parallels. But I had this like network going with where I grew up in Flowood, Mississippi, and they would get Favre cards for me because they know I'd buy at a pretty decent rate. And then I would just bring them to Hattiesburg, and they would buy those from me or trade very well for them. And I'd make, 15, 20% every single time doing that. So it was awesome. I mean, for 3 years or so when I did that, it was great. And that just really helped me build my Griffey collection as well. And then, of course, I kept a lot of Favre cards that I really liked, but some of them I didn't. Like, I'll give you an example. There's a 1997 playoff, I think it was Prime, and it's an extra point insert that was like 1 in 480 packs. It's just this felt card. And when it came out, it booked for $250 high. So I could buy that in Flowood, Mississippi for like 160, 170, but then I could sell for about $230 to the Hattiesburg store because they could actually sell it for over high value. So they would probably sell it for like $270. So everybody won in that situation.
That's amazing. And I remember Favre was the hottest thing in the hobby as far as football went back then. I mean, he was the face of Skybox and was on the packaging and had his own inserts. And I have the Skybox Autographics, which he didn't have a regular one of those, but he had the 1 out of 100.
The Century?
Yep,
yeah, I don't have that one. That's a great one, though.
I have number 4 of 100.
Oh, did you get that recently in the last 2 or 3 years? I recall seeing that one, I think.
It's probably 4 years ago. I got back into the hobby. I was out of the hobby from 2000 to 2014, got back in early 2014 at the beginning of the year and picked up a bunch of Favres that I actually didn't even know existed. To your point, there was no internet. Back in the 90s, you were really subject to what you saw at card shows and at the local card shops.
Well, I followed Beckett magazine like every month. It was, it was my magazine, and I always had to have And coincidentally, I'm about to have a daughter, and my wife threw a bunch of names at me, and one of them was Beckett. And I'm like, oh, I like that name because it has like this random meaning to me with Beckett Magazine. So we're going to name our daughter Beckett.
That's amazing.
But that's how I found out about all of the cards. I mean, even your local card shops, I mean, they would only have so much. And in terms of rare cards, I mean, there was no internet really. So you really saw what was rare and what wasn't based on what even your card shops were able to get.
Yeah, and especially if you were in the area where Favres would surface, right? Because a lot of the Favres would find their way there. And if anybody went to national shows or even shows a couple states away, they would probably come back with those Favres. So that must have been pretty amazing. Same thing in Wisconsin. You had a lot of those Favres surfacing, but I didn't even know. I knew about Topps Finest gold refractors and some of the inserts that started to creep up, but I didn't really know much about PMGs and some of those really rare inserts that, I mean, you loved Flair, but Flair Showcase Legacy was, I don't even know if those ever surfaced in my area.
Right. Yeah, man, that was one of those sets. I mean, I wasn't rich growing up or anything like that, so I never bought those packs because they were always at least $7 a pack at the card shops. So I usually stuck to the $3 or so pack range, but I was always fascinated with them. And I was at the mall in Hattiesburg, doing my shuffle with the Brett Favre stuff. And one guy came in there and he opened a box of, it was 98 Flair Showcase Baseball. And he pulled an Ivan Rodriguez masterpiece.
Wow.
And I thought that was the coolest thing ever because 101s were just now becoming a thing. I mean, that whole thing started in 1997. So that was just unreal to me. And for some reason that stuck with me. And I always wanted to have these masterpieces of these guys. So I've bought, and I've sold, and I hustle with cards still. And I mean, I have a pretty extensive collection, especially with Favre. I mean, I'll name some of my favorites. I like those Donruss Preferred precious metals. You know which ones I'm talking about?
Yep.
So for Favre, I got the 97 and the 99. And the 99 is really hard to find because there's only 25 of them.
Wow.
And then with Griffey, I got the 97 and the 98. There's 197s and 50 98s. I've always liked those. And I'm fascinated with Select Certified from 96. So I have the whole rainbow for Favre's. Well, actually, the only one I'm missing is the subset premium stock mirror red. There's only 20 made, but I have the rest of them. And I got a PSA 10 mirror gold Brett Favre. And I got like in baseball, the 98 Donruss Crusades. You know which ones I'm talking about?
Yep.
Those are real big, but I got the Favres for those, the green, purple, and red, and just a ton of other stuff.
Yeah, do you have any of the PMGs or rubies or platinum medallions or anything like that?
I have the platinum medallions. I don't have the rubies. I've owned a couple in the past, but I got rid of them. I don't have the PMGs either. So, yeah, I'm still missing out on those. But with the 97 PMGs, they've just exceeded what I'm even willing to try to pay for them. I mean, they're just beyond that point unless you find a steal and someone doesn't really know what they have and they sell it by it now or something.
Sure. I was really fortunate to get in pretty heavy in 2014, so I was able to grab the red PMG Beckett 9. And then I think it's the highest grade. Yeah. And then also a graded 9 of the 99 PMG as well. So, we talked about some of the stuff you have and I shared some of the stuff I have, but if you had to pick, what are 4 of your favorite Brett Favre cards?
Probably the 96 Select Certified Mirror Gold of the base version. And then I really like the 1998 Leaf Rookies and Stars for football. I like the Crusades out of that. And then, as I mentioned, the Donruss Preferred Precious Metals. Those are my favorites. I mean, one of my other favorites is the 97 Topps Finest Gold Embossed Die Cut Refractor. That's a really nice one.
It's a beauty. Those are pretty rare.
Yeah, those are hard to find.
Do you have that one?
Yeah, I have that one.
Nice. That's probably on my list too. So how many Favres do you think you have if you had an estimate?
Oh, geez. probably a few thousand. I mean, I don't just buy a ton of the base cards, but I have mostly everything from the 90s, with the exception of some rare cards here and there, like the ones we've talked about.
Do you have a goal with your Favre collection overall kind of moving forward, or how do you approach it?
Not really. I mean, I feel like my goal is always changing. So there's still, some cards I'd like to have, but if I don't get them, it's okay. I don't have a want list on paper. Everything's in my head. I mean, I obviously know what's out there, and if I see it listed, then I'll buy it if I need to.
For sure.
But, I mean, sometimes with me, the chase for a card is better than actually owning it.
I agree.
So once I own it, it's like, okay, well, now what? And then I want to chase something else. And then I'll list something on eBay and try to make a profit, and then use that money to buy whatever else I'm chasing. It's just a cycle. But
For
there's
sure.
still lots of cards that I have no intention of selling. And I got some pretty good stuff still locked away in the Favre case.
Nice. Well, on that note, Sean, thanks so much for being on the podcast. It was a pleasure talking about everything Favre, and I'm sure we'll be in touch.
Yeah, same, Jordan. All right, take care, man.
Awesome. Thanks, Sean. It's always fun to connect with great collectors like Sean. There aren't a ton of Favre super collectors out there, it seems, but when I do find them, we're sure to nerd out about 90s cards. A big shout out to Sean for taking the time. Next up, we have Grant Slayton, who goes by Waldorf Stories on Instagram. Grant is from Baraboo, Wisconsin, and grew up watching Brett play as a kid. He's one of the best hobbyists I know and has an unreal basketball card collection. Grant had some great insight and stories about Brett from childhood, and I really enjoyed our conversation. So here is my chat with Grant. Being a Wisconsin kid, can you tell me some of your memories of Brett Favre?
For me, it was every Sunday we had family day at my uncle's house, and we had between us and our cousins, there was like 10 kids, and every Sunday at some point we all came in from playing outside to watch the Packers. And Brett Favre, it was, you could be down 7-10 points the entire game, but you always felt like you had the comeback kid was there. He was just special to watch. He was the Michael Jordan for us in rural Wisconsin. My father would always tell me he was a 49ers fan in the 80s, and because it was so bad in Green Bay for so long. And then Brett Favre came along and, replaced the Magic Man, and all of a sudden we had a contender, him and Reggie White, just big personalities on that team.
Well, and I fell in love with the Packers in '94 when I was 9, and Brett just brought this energy to the game. He was the gunslinger, and the camaraderie, the fun he had on the field, and kind of carefree attitude, and always had a smile on his face. That's what I appreciated about him.
Absolutely. And his personality, made it feel like made you feel a deeper connection with him. The happy-go-lucky gunslinger, gambler, what a personality we had on the field. Brett Favre was pretty special to grow up watching.
Yeah, 100%. On the card front, as far as the hobby, did you collect Brett?
Well, so in the 90s, I started collecting when I was 8 or 9, and my first card memory of him, we were all probably third grade, 8 years old. We're on the playground for recess, and I had a small class, and so most of us boys were into collecting cards. And this kid had a box of, Pro Set, like 91 Pro Set, I think. And he sees a Brett Favre Atlanta Falcons card. And I from my memory, none of us knew he played for the Atlanta Falcons.
Okay.
This was, 1994 or something. And it was just, we're young kids, and we didn't realize that he had started and was drafted by the Falcons. And it was just like, one of the coolest things. Like, everyone was jealous that kid had this Atlanta Falcons rookie card of Brett Favre. And I actually still have a Brett Favre Pro Set card to this day.
Man, that's a great story. So did you collect Brett then when you were a kid?
No money to really collect him, but his common cards were like, the grails as a kid. You had your common card Brett Favre's, and they were in your big cases, or your wooden plaques. I'm sure you remember those.
Oh, yeah.
Anything you got of Brett Favre, and, that was part of your Brett Favre collection. Every kid had a small Brett Favre collection. And you just never had the big cards, of course. Those were, you'd see them at card shops or shows, and you'd think about them for a week straight as a kid.
I went down to Dallas and was at Jim Beckett's hobby dinner, and he had me on the podcast, and we talked about Favre, and he mentioned the regional premiums, which makes a lot of sense. Going into your local card shop, a lot of those inserts and rookies and Stadium Club 91 and 92, those were unattainable for me as a kid.
Oh, for sure. I remember seeing one as a kid, and it was, it was like seeing a Hannes Wagner. It was just such a big deal. We all knew the card existed in the Falcons jersey with the top Stadium Club, and it was well before eBay and all that, and you didn't see it. That card, very special card. They've been going up like crazy lately, from what I've heard too.
Yeah, I have a couple pages of them in my binder, and a handful of the 92 Stadium Club. I like the 92 Stadium Club better. I think that was it was Brett's beginning as a Packer, so I always thought of that as kind of his Packer rookie card.
And I heard that one's going up the most.
Yeah, and the crazy part about that is, as a kid, I had a lot of base cards of Brett. I would see the expensive inserts and the rookies, but never even sniff those, really. But then you turn around, and as we got back into this, I got back into the hobby in 2014, and I started discovering I didn't even know too much about the PMGs or the Rubies or a lot of these rare cards just because I had been out of the hobby so long.
Yep.
So,
since those cards were so rare back then, and your only exposure was going to a local card shop or maybe a show if you were lucky, those cards were so rare that I don't remember most of them growing up.
Me either.
I remember like everything else, the smaller cards, of course, the smaller inserts, I remember them all. But the really rare ones, and it makes sense, no one had them.
Yeah, and I don't even think they knew what they had even when they did have them.
Yeah, for sure. I've been told stories of, I think it was with Akeem Olajuwon, someone back in 1998 went to a local show and bought one of the PMG greens as if it was numbered to 100 cards.
Well, yeah, it's got the 100 on it. Nobody really knew that only the first 10 were green. Correct.
Yeah, it was right after the release, and someone was at a show. They sold it for not much because they thought there was 100 of them. So yeah, there was definitely, it was the first time for like those really rare parallels. So
well, and there were quite a few cards numbered. Even if you look at like a 98 Upper Deck copper or something, right? Like numbered to 100. But we all know that card numbered to 100 is different than a PMG numbered to 100. And that's just like apples to oranges. But those nuances didn't emerge until really over the last, let's call it 6 years.
Sure.
So that's amazing stuff. So any other last thoughts on Brett just as a whole?
The guy was, like you said, the local myth. Everything he did was, it was just so captivating for everyone. And he was our Michael Jordan here in Wisconsin. When I really got back into this, I chased a lot of his stuff. I did. His precious metal gems, his rubies, everything I could get, I got. And but then I focused on basketball shortly after. He was always be very special around here. even how he finished his career, we followed him. A lot of people didn't. A lot of people hated him, but we started watching Viking games. You know, he was really important.
Yeah, he was, to me, you're right, the Michael Jordan of Wisconsin, but also he was kind of like Uncle Brett. You know, he was this like fun dude fun to watch, but also you'd see him in the media. He's always goofing around, but when Sunday came, he was ready to go. And anytime Brett was in the game, which was every single game, you know, never missed a game as a Packer.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And whenever he was in the game, you had a chance. And we, of course, remember the Super Bowl 31 victory and just a lot of records broken and the Lambeau streak. I went to my first game at Lambeau in 1997 when they were in the midst of that 27-game home winning streak. And they were so hard to beat at home. And you're right, Reggie and Freeman and Levens and just amazing, amazing teams. And Brett was the leader of that. So those are the most fond memories I have as a kid, and been really fun to collect him and just connect with guys like you just to kind of reminisce about the good times back when he was playing.
Mm-hmm. No doubt.
My last conversation is with Dr. James Beckett, who started and ran Beckett Magazine for many years. Beckett Magazine was my go-to price guide in the 90s. Jim is an absolute hobby legend, and it was a huge honor to chat with him in Dallas back in January prior to his annual hobby dinner. Jim has had me on a few of his episodes of his podcast titled Sports Card Insights, which I highly recommend you check out. This specific audio comes from one of my conversations with Mr. Beckett, and just a heads up, it's been edited for length and clarity purposes. I'm very grateful for Jim letting me share this with you guys, so I hope you enjoy it.
Welcome, another episode, Dr. James Beckett, Sports Card Insights here with Jordan Hagedorn. Today's episode, we're going to talk about Brett Favre, who has many passionate fans, but as an iconic Green Bay Packer, this being recorded in Dallas, Texas. He does have fans in Dallas, Texas too, but he was, the Cowboys shot him down and he shot down the Cowboys. You know, they went back and forth for many years. But welcome, Jordan. How did you get started on Brett Favre? It sounds like he was since you're from Wisconsin, we found that out. But there's other guys from Wisconsin.
Yeah, Brett Favre, he's my favorite athlete of all time. And growing up in Wisconsin, you have to be a Packer fan for the most part, right?
Or leave the state.
True.
Yeah. And you mentioned Gunslinger, but I always thought that's what made me nervous. Eli Manning kind of had the same kind of thing, is that when they throw an interception, the next series when they went out there, they had no memory of that. They would just still perhaps even force things into coverage.
It's safe to say Brett has a short memory.
He had a short memory because he was not perfect, but he never lacked confidence.
Never.
In his ability to thread the needle.
And you didn't know if he'd had 4 interceptions or 3 touchdowns, but whenever you went on the field, you didn't know what would happen. And that's what made it so compelling, I feel like, was when Brett was on the field, you had a chance.
That's what made him a good quarterback, I think, because when you're back there, if you've got to think about it of, hey, maybe he'll intercept this, you just got to pull the trigger. And he was great at that.
He was not afraid. I mean, he was somebody that commanded the huddle. He commanded attention from the other team to scheme against him, but there's nothing you could do because he was so crazy. There was just nothing you could possibly do. But he had some great weapons over the years: Antonio Freeman, Robert Brooks, and Dorsey Levens, Edgar Bennett back in the day as running backs, and then Reggie White on the other side of the ball. But those years when I got into collecting Favre in 1994 when I was a kid, when I was 9, and then I was fortunate enough to meet him when I was 10 in 95. Yeah. And that changed everything for me. That was a catalyst. He was in the middle of his MVP season. And from there, I was find his cards here. I had 1994 score. I remember pulling out of a pack. And my favorite cards of his are some of these base cards, Skybox Premium and SP and some of these. And my collection as a kid was not great, but it was
condition-wise.
I loved it.
Just mainly
just
base
the
cards.
Quality, base cards, not a lot of inserts. I mean, Favre was red hot, so his inserts were expensive.
And your only avenue was to go to the card shop where the regional premiums were probably pretty.
Yep, that's exactly right. And so then eventually I still have my binder, my original binder from when I was a kid, but my collection was just a lot of base cards. But I got back into collecting in 2014, and then I started hunting down some of the Favre inserts, which were still pretty affordable. And then I got into some of the whales, some of the big cards, the PMGs and the rubies. And
Did you get them before they
did.
took off like a rocket?
I did. I was very fortunate. The market has gone up on a lot of those cards, but I got back in at a time where I remember those cards were amazing and unattainable, and some of them I didn't even know existed because I'd never seen them. But then as you get back into it,
tough.
and they're
really
gorgeous
tough,
cards. Yeah, it's like a needle in a haystack.
Were you getting them on eBay, or where were you?
I found a private collector who had some Favres, and then he had some friends who had some of them, and we met up at one point, and I offered him a price for a few of them, and he was actually a big source. A guy named Brent was a source of me getting quite a few of them.
In the price guides back in the day, Brett Favre in those mid-late 90s sets was roughly equal and equivalent to Marino and Elway. Compare and contrast that. Did you see it that way, or did you see Favre above? He was younger than those guys.
Yeah, you had tiers.
They were already established, but he was frequently about the same price once they got through their into the.
I would say Favre was even higher at one point. 95, 96, 97. He won back-to-back MVPs. He was the face of Skybox, if you remember that. And they put him on all the packaging, and he had some of the hard inserts. And I remember his rookie card, his Stadium Club rookie, and the 92 Stadium Club. Those were sky high. And I would argue they were about the same, if not higher than the Elway and Marino Topps rookies and even the Jerry Rice rookie. And so for a while, I think Favre was the hottest guy in football in the hobby. And so you're right. There were the regional premiums at the card shop. They were selling for full Beckett.
Now on the card front, because this is Sports Card Insights, do you if it's $100 card, you'd rather have the $100 card that's the rare insert than the $100 card that's the low numbered serial numbered thing?
Sure. I don't collect modern Favre, so I only collect 1991 to 2000. I think that was the best era of cards of all time.
Okay.
I respect Panini and a lot of the one-of-ones and all the flashy stuff now, but I do not personally collect that.
Would you take it?
I would take it.
Do you have a want list?
I do.
How do you know? So you know what you don't have?
There are a few cards, usually for the most part higher end, or some things from the 90s that I do want. I don't share that because I feel like if I share that price on those may go up.
Goose you.
Yep. And so I keep that pretty tight. But there are probably about 12 Favre cards I need, and then I can officially call it complete. I will not stop collecting Favre, but there are 12 cards that I would like that would satisfy my Brett Favre collection.
Amazing. I showed you a Brett Favre card I had. Do you have that? There's only 13 of those.
I don't.
Okay, well,
that's a nice.
So I've got not huge bragging rights here with this awesome Brett Favre collector, but like I said, I picked up stuff contemporaneously, and so I just had that, and then I got it slabbed because it's probably. Do you get many of your cards slabbed?
I have the PMG, the 99 PMG in a graded 9, and I have the 97 PMG in a graded 9 as well. So I think they're both the highest grade that they've achieved. So they're beautiful, and I appreciate when you can. Beautiful. Yeah. So, but I would say the best thing about Favre overall is he was a gunslinger, but he had so much fun playing the game. And that's one thing I've taken from Brett in my life and my career, and even in the hobby especially, is if you're not having fun, then you're not giving it the Brett.
Well, and the other thing, I'm throwing you one here, but I mean, I believe your goal is the same as his goal to make the other people better, the people around you to
100%. Yeah, and
that's going to serve you well as an agent.
Well, and I think I became an NFL agent because I want to uplift people and help people and do what I could to lead them kind of the promised land. And that was Brett's goal with the Packers and Packer fans, and anything he did, he always wanted to be that leader. And he did it in a very obscure way. A lot of leaders are very calculated and they're very buttoned up, and they're the ones that are in the film room and studying and all these things. And I think Brett just did it through.
That's not the impression I have. It's sensory. It's just in the moment.
Yes, visceral.
And that's visceral. I'm for my friends. No, I'm not obviously like that, but I'm trying to be, not too analytical. And being retired now, it's easy to just look at the cards. So, for example, I don't know how many Brett Favre cards I have. I have a whole bunch. And they're not perfectly organized, but now I've found out that Jordan and I have at least one that you don't have, and I may have a couple others. So we'll see if we can compare notes at some point. But What's your competition out there for Brett Favre stuff?
There's a few guys.
Others?
There are a few others, and as you know, with some of the bigger cards, it only takes a couple others for those prices to double and get up there. So,
exactly.
The beauty is, Favre is not Michael Jordan. So basketball has been crazy.
Well, these
some of those
PMGs
prices are unbelievable.
Goodness.
So
I know, but Favre was and is huge, and Jordan was bigger, but the differentials there, that the Jordan PMG is graded authentic,
right, and it still went for
$3-something $100,000, and so your 9 or whatever, but yours is red, not green.
The red is 8 and 9. Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest thing I would say about that competition is it's fun to meet other Favre collectors. There's not a lot that go in just that niche of the 90s.
Yeah.
But the thing for me is there's enough for everybody. There's a few cards that, of course, I would like to have, but I'll find them. And if they're meant to be in my collection, they will. And if not, that's all right too.
What about the cards from the current cards of Favre that are in retro styles? Do you? You still really want to limit yourself?
Anything after 2000, I'm not super into. I respect it. I appreciate it. I will pick it up if I see it. If I'm at the National and I see a couple cards, I might pay $5 or $10, but I'm not looking to get in that. That's a slippery slope.
You can't go in the dollar boxes anymore, right? I mean, are you ever find anything in the?
Oh yeah, there's always some good stuff. You'll find some Favre inserts for $1. Yeah.
And you don't have them, or you
once in a while, or I still pick them up. I'm not afraid to get doubles.
Jordan, what other last minute thoughts do you have about Brett Favre? I think he's highly collectible, and you got in get a reasonable time. I mean, even now there's people getting into it and going deep and strong on some of these iconic players.
Yeah, I think.
But cards were way less even 5 years ago.
They were. I mean, he's a legend. He's somebody that he was a marketable player, but he's also just this guy who seemed to be a really good dude and somebody that you really enjoyed watching play. And he's got a lot of fans. I remember hearing people that aren't even Packer fans, but they love Brett Favre. They appreciate what he brought to the game. And
they've forgiven him.
They have. I would just say this. What Brett Favre has done for me as an inspiration to become an NFL agent, to collect his cards, and just to watch him as a Packer player, I would highly recommend and hope that a young kid or even another collector finds their player and nurtures that relationship with that player in a way, whether it's buying their stuff or watching them play. And one base card can change everything. I got one 1994 score Brett Favre, and now, 2 decades later, I have one of the craziest collections of all time. For that to inspire me to now chase down some of the biggest Brett Favre cards on the planet is something that's super cool. So I encourage that love. I encourage nurturing that relationship and finding ways to buy things of that player or the poster or anything can be a catalyst for you to achieve whatever you're looking to do, just based on a little inspiration from your favorite guy.
Well, I enjoyed talking about John Elway with Tracy Hackler, and enjoyed hearing about Brett Favre from you, Jordan. And I think there's a Marino fan out there that won equal time, and maybe even a Troy Aikman fan who might live around here. So again, thanks listeners. Thanks Jordan. Very interesting episode. Jordan's got some amazing stuff, some good stories, and I encourage you to, how can the listeners track you on social media?
You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Jordan Hagedorn.
Good. That's a good note to end on. Again, thank you, listeners. Be back tomorrow with another episode.
There you have it. Thanks again to Jim Beckett. It's pretty unreal to have heavily consumed a magazine in your childhood and then to connect with the founder. Beckett Magazine created a lot of joy and brought a lot of value to the hobby. It's been really cool getting to know Jim. He truly loves collecting and is undoubtedly good for the hobby. With all that said, episode 4 is a wrap. Big thanks to my dad, Sean, Grant, and once again, Jim Beckett. It's been a lot of fun to reminisce about Brett and his cards, his career, and just his overall cultural impact with the Packers and in the hobby. I absolutely loved watching him play and have had a blast collecting him at a high level. One final note, since recording all these interviews, I'm proud to say that I acquired a holy grail of mine, the 1997 Fleer Metal Precious Metal Gems Green. Only 15 of these were made back in 1997, and I was fortunate to have found and purchased number 4, Brett's jersey number, which I consider the greatest Brett Favre card ever created. I'll be doing a video about that card in the future, so please keep an eye out for that. And with that, I want to say thank you all for taking the time to listen. I really appreciate the attention. If you have any Favres or just want to talk hobby, feel free to shoot me a message on Instagram at for.the.hobby or send me an email at jordan@forthehobby.com. Catch you later.
Perfect. For the hobby, 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 for the hobby.